All right, well, we're waiting on potentially a few more people to join. I'll run through a few points of order. So I'm sure everyone here is probably an expert at Zoom by now, although I am not because I still do most of my work in person. At the very bottom, we're not going to use the Q&A button. We're going to use the chat button for any questions that you have, just because it's easier for me to keep an eye on that than the Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout, go ahead and type your question in there, and I'll see it and get back to you when I do see it. So I think we've given probably enough time for everyone who's wanting to join. My name is Anthony Abbonato. I'm here with React Physical Therapy. And today we're going to talk about engaging your glutes. So this really important muscle group that everyone likes to talk about, but what should you do about it? So that's where we'll get started today. I am going to be using this, my computer mic for now, but if it is bad, please someone speak up in the chat if you can. If you can't hear me well, speak up in the chat and I will try to use a different mic that I have here. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you so that we can look at the PowerPoint very quickly. I'm not going to spend long on this part because you guys want to get to the exercises, I assume. So get this going. All right, so getting your glutes, simple exercise for a day at the desk. I want to do a very quick overview of the anatomy here. So this is looking at the back of your pelvis. I mean, your glutes are essentially just your butt muscles, but they're really important for the control of your hip, and not only important for the control of your hip, but from that, important for the control of your entire leg. So the glutes are referenced in the research in a lot of rehabilitation for knee injuries, ankle injuries, even spine injuries, because they help to stabilize that pelvis. If you're not using your glutes well, it will be more difficult for you to control your leg in all different kinds of movement, and then you can have movement faults that end up harming other joints. Even though the glutes themselves are at the hip, their importance really carries over to all of these other joints. The two that I want to focus on for now, there are three glute muscles. The two that I want to focus on for today is the gluteus maximus. You can see on the left side of this anatomy image is the biggest of the three. Now, what this does is it helps to do what we call hip extension. This is essentially just bringing your leg behind you, in particular, bringing your thigh behind you. In addition to that, it puts your pelvis in a really good position when you are active and standing. We'll talk about why we need that to be engaged. The other that you can see on the right side, it says it's been cut, is the glute medius. So that's underneath, still attached to the pelvis. And this wraps down to the thigh as well. You can, on the left side, you can see a little bit of where it attaches to that thigh bone, the femur. And the importance of the glute medius is that it helps to bring your leg out to the side. More importantly, actually, is that when you're standing on your leg, it helps to keep your pelvis level so that it doesn't drop into a bad position. So those are the two that we're going to focus on with the exercises for today, okay? So, yeah, stop, and we'll just dive right into the exercises you're looking for. So the first one we'll go over is it's like the bread and butter of corrective exercises we talk about for the glute. It's called a clam. Probably you've seen this before. I'm going to start with the basics and we'll get to more challenging exercises for the glutes as we continue. But the clams are really foundational for, in particular, the glute medius muscle. Now, when the glute medius muscle doesn't seem to be super strong or it's not active because you're not in a good position, There's a different muscle that takes over. It's called the TFL muscle, or tensor fasciae lata is what that stands for. And the TFL muscle actually connects to your IT band. So a lot of people say they have IT band tightness, but the IT band does not tighten and loosen on its own. It's that attachment of the TFL that tends to pull on the IT band to cause tightness. And one of the reasons the TFL could be pulling a lot is if your glute medius is not very strong. So that's one of the reasons why this is a really important exercise that we tend to use as a corrective exercise. So let me tilt down the screen here. All of these exercises are going to be exercises that you could do with just a yoga mat on the floor. You're not going to need anything special for them. I'm going to use the treatment table here just because I'm going to get a better angle of the camera when I do that. So for the clam, you're going to be lying on your side, and really important to start out, your hips need to be stacked, the top hip right over the bottom hip. A lot of people sit back like this when they first do the clam, and that is a great way to use your TFL, but not your glute med, okay? So in order to get the glute med better with the clamshell, we want to make sure that top hip is directly over bone and my shin bone are creating the point of an arrow that should be pointing straight forwards, okay? From this position, you want to make sure that you are not too high, okay? This is not going to do very well for the clamshells. You also want to make sure you're not all the way kicked back, okay? The knees creating a point with those two bones pointing straight forward. From here, the movement is very simple, but still something that I have to work on with people somewhat often is just lifting this knee and back down. Now, the reason why it might be deceptive of how simple it is because people like to compensate in so many different ways. The one way that in particular for this exercise, people will compensate a lot is they will roll the hips backward. Just like I talked about at the beginning of making sure that hip is stacked over to start, it needs to stay there the entire time, okay? When people do this, you can see that my knee is now lifted a bit when I just rolled my hips back, but I didn't really use my glute med. So from this starting position, you need to bring that knee up and out without letting the hips roll back and then back down. And this is it, just the clamshell. So super simple exercise. It's an easy thing to incorporate into your day. And you should be feeling this somewhat in the back. It's not going to be way in the back like the glute maximus is. It's going to be more to the side but slightly back. If you are feeling it more into the front, kind of where your pocket is, you are likely rotated too far back and you're using your TFL. So make sure that the knee comes out and you keep those hips forward. I can feel just a slight squeeze into the outside of my hip here, okay? Now, if this feels super easy, you can always add an exercise band around your knees. But if you're in the middle of your work day and you just want to get out of the chair, you don't necessarily need to do heavy strengthening. You just need to get these muscles active that have been falling asleep all day while you're at the desk, okay? So, like I said, starting with the basics of the basics for this one, but it's good to incorporate just in the middle of your day. So, before I move on, any questions about that one? I'll give you guys a moment, and also feel free to let me know if the audio is feeling a little rough. I can try a different mic. Looks like nothing in the chat, so that should be all good. Feel free to comment on any questions that you have while I go over the next one as well, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. For the next, we're going to talk about an exercise for the Glute Max. Once again, we're going to go over the very basics of corrective exercise for the Glute Max, but we will be showing variations of this one that can make it a little more challenging. So for the Glute Max, like I said, it brings the thigh A lot of people talk about, oh, I have tight hamstrings. It could be because you have overactive hamstrings because your glutes aren't super active. In hamstring strains, when there's a tear of the hamstring or a pull of the hamstring, as you might have heard of a few times, that is typically correlated with poor glute activation when you're doing some kind of very ballistic activity. So it's really important that this is strong, and we're sitting at the desk all day or just in a chair or on your couch. You're actually crushing the glute maximus a bit, so it really isn't active. So it's good to take small breaks a few times a day to see if you can get a little more blood flow to that muscle, a little bit more active. So going to the bridge, a very simple one, once again, going to the basics of the corrective exercises that we know in physical therapy. You're going to start by lying on your back for this one. This is an easier setup because your knees are going to be bent. You can make this about a 90-degree bend in the knees. You don't need your feet very close to you, and you don't need them very far either. So right about this position. From here, you're going to press your entire foot, both feet, down into the table. What I want you to avoid with this is I don't want you to just do your heels, and I don't want you to just do your toes. Make sure that you're using the whole foot to create this pressure, okay? From here, pressing down into the table, you're going to lift your pelvis upwards, okay? So just like this. You should get into a position where your trunk is flat and level with your thighs, and then slowly lower back down, okay? Now this is bringing that thigh back in comparison to the pelvis. So that's why it's using the Glute Max, all right? For this, what I see sometimes is people will they'll kind of tuck their pelvis under to start, and you don't necessarily want to do that because you're going to overuse your rectus abdominis for this. We want to make it more of a glute exercise, okay? So you want your core engaged, but you don't want it to do movement for this exercise. You want to be in this stable spine position where you don't let the spine curl. You also don't want to let the spine arch as you do this movement. And you just press up and let all of the movement happen at the hip, okay? All right. Very quickly, before we talk about how you can make the bridge a little more challenging, there's a few ways you can do that. Any questions? Looks like we're all good. Again, feel free to throw anything in the chat if you need to as I go over the next ones. So, making the bridge a little more difficult. There's a few things we're going to go over. One is going to be doing it single leg, and we'll talk about how you can progressively make that harder and easier as well. We're going to talk about doing marches in the bridge position, which can be probably the most difficult of what we'll do here. And then we'll talk about doing oscillations at the top of the bridge, very small oscillations to just really get a glute burn, okay? So, tilt this screen back down, go back into the same starting position, and we'll start by talking about the single leg bridge. So this is fairly straightforward, same starting position. You're going to take one leg and kick it straight. You're going to lift that slightly into the air. And then with just the leg that's bent, you're going to press down into the table and lift your hips up into this position. Now, there's a few things that are challenging about that position. I'll switch legs to show you. So, one is that it is harder for most people to get into this flat position still, where if you look at my trunk here and my thigh, they are level. Tends to be harder in that position. The other thing that people tend to get wrong with a single leg bridge is that the other hip, that side, drops down. I'll show you. So this is that level position. This is if it drops. So this is not good control of the pelvis, and this is not going to help your glute. So you want to make sure you keep that nice and level as you press the bent leg, press that whole foot to the table. Keep both sides of the pelvis level as you lift them up at the same time. can already feel that I'm using my core to try to fight that, okay? So make sure when you come up, don't go into, you can kind of see here I'm more arched versus if I keep myself in a nice stable back position, I can get that hip just as high. It's more challenging, and you're going to use more glute, but that's what we're going for, okay? From that, if that feels too difficult, something that you can do to help is you can, instead of straightening that leg, you can keep it tucked closer to you. This keeps more of your body weight centered and will not be as challenging. So lifting straight up and then back down. Okay, so that's a variation you could do. This, you have to really be careful. Don't let that hip drop downwards. Make sure it stays hiked up here, okay? Another variation you could do is going to start with both legs, okay? Pressing up into that bridge, getting into that good bridge position we talked about initially. You can then do marches where you lift one leg at a time. This is more challenging than you might think, okay? And in particular with this, you have to make sure that your hips don't wobble side to side as you're moving into that marching position. So lifting one knee, all of this stays still. Back down, get nice and stable, make sure you're all the way up, lift the other knee, everything stays up, and then back down. And then you can alternate, okay? It's going to use a lot more of your core as well, but should still be a nice glute activation at the same time. Make sure as you lift up, don't drop. As you lift up, don't arch, okay? This is a challenging one. You really got to think about staying stable as you do this marching, okay? So those are 3 variations to the bridge. Those are all going to get your glute max again, okay? Based on my experience, the bridge marching is going to be the hardest of all of them because it takes the most coordination of your trunk at the same time. The single leg bridge might feel like it isolates the glute a little bit more, but it's less to think about than the alternating of the marches when you what you're doing for an exercise program. For this, what I'm trying to give you guys is just a few different exercises you can do just a few repetitions of in the middle of your workday, just to get out of the sitting position and just to get moving. So really 10 repetitions of any of these would be just fine. It doesn't have to be an extensive amount of exercise because it's not a full program that's getting all of these components. It's just a break from sitting in the chair. For that bridge hold, if you're going in that position, I would say you could probably do 5 lifts of each knee, and that would be plenty, okay? At the same time, it really depends on where your glute strength is, on how much you're going to be able to tolerate before your form breaks down, okay? So if you feel like you're doing 10 repetitions of the single leg bridge, but at the 8th, 9th, and 10th, you notice, wow, I lost my form, well, then you shouldn't be shooting for 10. You should stop at 7 or 8, okay? Make sure you have good form throughout. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. So next, we're going to go back to the glute medius for the next exercise. And this is going to be really targeted if you get the position right. A lot of times, this is challenging for people if they already have stiffness at their hip. Sometimes this particular exercise can be really challenging. So we'll talk through the right position for this. I want to be really picky about the position, okay? So if you remember back to when we talked about the anatomy at the beginning, we talked about the glute med bringing that leg out to the side. So that's exactly the movement we're going to do here, okay? Is we're just going to bring that leg out to the side. So I tend to start in the same position as the clams and then straighten the top leg. Okay. Now, the key with this is that you don't want that leg to be forward for this exercise. Okay. you want it to be straight down in line with your trunk, okay? From here, similar to the clam, you need to make sure your hips don't drift back. And it's very, very subtle. People will, when they straighten their leg out, just roll back just a bit, okay? So make sure, hold your hip forward if you need to, so that when you straighten this leg out, it stays where it is, okay? That already, when I do that, I make sure my hips and pelvis are in a good position. And I straighten my leg, I can already feel that I'm squeezing my glute just a little bit because I have to in order to make sure I don't roll back, okay? So in that position, keeping that leg straight, knee locked, you're just gonna lift straight out and slowly. Now, when you lift up, the tendency people have is they wanna use their TFL for whatever reason. They wanna use their TFL so they drift that leg forward as they go up. Okay, that's not going to target the glute medius as much as we want it to. So instead, we're only going to lift straight up. Okay, imagine that you have a wall that you are sliding along right in front of your leg in order to do that movement. Okay, straight up and then back down. You should feel, once again, similar to the clam, you should feel like you're squeezing slightly back on the outside of the hip. Okay, up. And then back down, okay? So once again, as far as sets and reps, I'm just trying to give you guys some ideas of how to break up your workday if you're sitting at the desk all day. So 10 repetitions is just fine to get some blood flow, get some muscle activation. It does not need to be a complex program for this, okay? So the other thing you can do with this position to make this more challenging to even further target the glute medius is you can rotate the leg. Now, what I see a lot of people do in the clinic when I try to teach them this is they just move their foot down, okay? They move at their ankle instead of twisting at the hip, okay? So you want to imagine your thigh still, same setup, hips still forward, so they're stacked, legs straight, thigh is rotated slightly in, okay? It's a small movement, okay, to rotate that hip. I'm not making a lot of movement at that hip. But if I hold that, hips stay stacked, and then do the lift out, oh, I get so much more squeeze here, okay? You really target that glute med muscle. So try that if you're feeling like the leg lift is just too easy, and make sure it's the whole thigh that twists in. Do not just twist at the foot, okay? So show you really quickly. A lot of people they point their foot down. That's not what we want. We want to make sure the whole thigh twists downwards, okay? All right. Once again, 10 repetitions is more than enough to wake the glute up just for a quick, hey, I've been sitting at the desk for 2 hours. I've had a ton of meetings. I've got another meeting in 2 minutes. I just want to get down on the floor. I just want to wake my glutes up because I've been sitting on them for a while. Quick 10 repetitions. That's the whole point here, okay? Add movement to your day instead of only having it in little chunks after the workday is over, all right? Okay. So, any questions on any of that so far before we go into the next one, which I'm actually really excited about? Looks like we are all good. So, as always, throw anything in the chat if you have questions while I'm going over the next one. And if I see it, I will comment. So for the next one, we're going to go over a squat. Okay. I'm going to be very simple with it. Okay. I'm going to be picky, but we don't have to make this a big movement with weight or anything like that. And it can be small if you feel like you're having trouble with your mobility, but it is a great way to get your glutes active if you set up in a very specific position. So for our squat, we are going to take a wider stance than shoulder width apart. The purpose is for this to target the glute, okay? And so that wider stance will help to target, versus if you're in a more narrow stance, you do get glute, but you also get a little more hamstring as well, which is good if that's what you're going for. But for this, we want to target the glute. We want to be a corrective exercise to specifically engage the glute to get that activation, okay? So we're gonna be more specific and take a wider stance. Now, when we take that wider stance, we need to be really picky about our knee position in relation to our feet, okay? So I'll try to demonstrate that here. Let me start in the bottom position, and I'll show you this by in a seated position. You imagine this would be the bottom of my squat, right? This is what we're gonna go for, a slightly wider stance. Now, if you notice, in order to do that, I have to point my feet outwards, okay? That is okay for this as long as the knees do not cave in, okay? The thigh bone here, the femur, needs to be pointed in the same direction as my toes are pointed. Otherwise, you're going to be in a bad position. So make sure you're taking that wide knee stance. By doing this wide knee stance, you're already setting yourself up for success to use your glutes. So make sure if you're doing the squat with a wide stance, you bring those knees out and those thigh bones are pointing in the same direction as the toes. If you need to practice this, do it in sitting, just like I am here, okay? Just get into this position, toes slightly pointed out. Notice this would be bad, okay? Thighs are pointed too far in. Farther out, this is much better. You do not need to overdo it, right? I don't need to have my toes lift. I don't need to walk onto the outside of my foot. I just need to do enough that my knees are right over my ankle and those thighs are pointed in the same direction as the toes, okay? If you have trouble getting into this position, bring a little farther in. Same setup. If you still have trouble, a little farther in. Same setup, okay? Even in a shoulder width or hip width apart, you still can't have those femurs, those thighs pointed inside of the toes. They have to line up, okay? So this applies for any position. So if you have too much trouble out here, bring those feet in until you can get the right position, okay? So from here, when you're doing this off of a chair, if you're doing a box squat, is what we call it. And if you're spending all day in office, I know you have something you can sit on. You can lean forward first. And I really like to be picky with people and take this slowly in that don't use your momentum to shoot yourself forward, because then you're just going to use your back muscles. Lean forward first so that you feel like your weight is over your feet, okay? When that is true, where you feel like your weight is over your feet and you have leaned forward enough, you can press into your heels and lift straight up, okay? So I am not shooting myself forward with momentum. You can see how I really shoot myself forward. You are leaning forward as step one. Pause here. After this, press through your feet. Go straight up into the air, okay? That is going to be a better way to engage your glutes, and your quads are going to be involved for that squat. I'm going to show you the same thing, but as I'm showing you this, same thing as before. Any questions, throw them in the chat. So, actually, sorry, all that light, that's going to be difficult. I will show you from this. Slightly until I can find a good position, okay? From here, the beginning of the movement is not momentum. I don't want to start with momentum, right? I'm going to slowly get my lean forward. I don't round, right? I'm not doing a slouch. I stay up tall, lean forward. Once my weight is over my feet, I press through the feet and go straight up, okay? And then back down in a similar fashion. So again, lean forward, weights over the feet, press through your feet to go straight up. And then back down in the same way. All right, so that is the last exercise I have for you guys. We've got 2 to challenge the glute med and 2 to challenge the glute max, okay? The clams for the glute med, making sure those hips are stacked. The leg lift, lying on your side, okay? We call it the side lying leg lift. Keeping it simple. That leg lift, you can adjust it by turning it inwards in order to lift and get more glute med activation, okay? Then there's the bridges for Glute Max. Remember, there's a bunch of variations we went over. You can do both legs at the same time, okay? You could do one leg at a time. With one leg, you could have the other knee tucked up to make it easier, or you could have the leg all the way straight to make it a little harder, and then you could do the marching, okay? And then the last one we went over is a glute-specific squat, okay? Making sure those feet are a little farther apart. If you can't get those knees out to point in the same direction as the toes, bring your feet in. And then we're leaning forward first, pressing through the feet, going straight up. Any questions on any of those? All right. Hopefully that was helpful. Once again, my name is Anthony Abbonato. That's the end of our webinar right now. If you have any questions, feel free to continue typing. I'll get to them here in a second. Brought to you by React Physical Therapy. Okay. I am broadcasting from the Wilmette location. So we are just across the Green Bay Metro stop at 1215 Washington Avenue. Screen freezes. Oh, I apologize. It sounds like the sound was periodically cutting out and the screen was freezing for someone. I apologize about that. But we're at the Wilmette location. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you are wondering, hey, I'm not sure if I need physical therapy and you're just unsure, we do offer free screens. We can do free screens through telehealth as well. The free screens, we would basically go through an assessment, see if physical therapy is appropriate for you, if it's something we think that would help you, or maybe you're doing really well and it's just something that you can get better with strength training with a trainer, then we would tell you that. So that's something that we do offer. You can call us at 312-835-3117 here at the Wilmette location. Someone asked the question, can we replay this? Yes. So since you have signed up for this, you will receive the recording of this in an email sometime within the next week. Our marketing director sends those out. I'm not sure the exact timeline, but within the next week, at the very least, you will get a recording of this. And hopefully you can rewatch it to get even more, detail. Make sure the detail of those exercises are refined so that you can really target those glutes. So yes, you can replay it. All right, anytime. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for attending. It was very, very nice to see you all.